For doing this. Oh, there's the voice is back.
Oh, we never get to hear her on the podcast.
The voice is back.
Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Katie from Greenlight, and we're thrilled to welcome you to our online event series, Squawkin Sports, hosted by Patrick Sauer and David J. Roth. For this installment, they'll be chatting with Drew Magary about his new book, The Night the Lights Went Out, a memoir of life after brain damage. So you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to our hosts, Patrick and David, and tonight's featured author, Drew, for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Though we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. There's just a few housekeeping things to go over before we get started tonight. In our Zoom webinar, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways that you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. It's a great way to show your appreciation for the author and to interact with your fellow attendees. So if you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author, please post that in the Q&A module, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program, so please make sure you're putting your questions there and not in the chat. And importantly, tonight's featured book, The Night the Lights Went Out, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. at both our Fulton Street and Flatbush Ave stores, where you can purchase Drew's book and many others on site. You can also order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll be dropping the buy link in the chat in just a moment. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. Your series hosts for Squawkin Sports are Patrick Sauer and David J. Roth. Patrick has written for many large publications you've heard of and even more small ones that no longer exist. He's a founding member of the Billings, Montana to Brooklyn sports writing pipeline. David was an editor at Deadspin and is now a co-founder and co-owner at defector.com. His writing has appeared in The New Republic, The New Yorker, Food and Wine, and The Baffler. We'll be speaking with our featured author, Drew Magary. A co-founder of Defector and a columnist for SF Gate, Drew Magary wrote at Deadspin for over a decade before quitting with the rest of the staff en masse in protest. He's the author of 3 novels, including Point B, The Hike, and The Postmortal. He lives in Maryland with his wife, his 3 kids, his dog, and 95% of a functioning brain. His new book, The Night the Lights Went Out, is a fascinating, darkly funny comeback story of learning to live with a broken mind after a near-fatal traumatic brain injury. Author Kelsey McKinney described it as a visceral, transporting tale of life, death, and the liminal space between, and a necessary window into the aftermath of trauma and a reminder to never take our senses for granted. Drew is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then he'll be talking with Patrick and David and with all of you. Please take it away, Patrick, David, and Drew.
Thank you.
Katie.
Hello.
By the way, the background photo of me, Patrick, on your wall is primo shit. Thank you so much. It makes me look like makes me look I'm hypnotizing you. Like, ooh, Batman.
And Vikings colors, are they not? Is it not Vikings appropriate? I believe it's purple and yellow, is it not?
They are beautiful, and I sincerely, honestly appreciate it, along with the great pumpkin merchandise. I love it.
Halloween, we got to live it up.
That's right. We're in the spirit, baby.
I think it's a little weird that Patrick just had that photo of you lying around his house.
Yeah. That's actually, he didn't do that for this event. That's just how his wall looks.
It's been there for every episode up to this.
It's weirder that my wife put it up.
It's like, it gets me fired up with Squawk Sports. Going at it as hard as I can.
They have a podcast and they have jobs.
So is it my turn to read?
Yeah, if you want to read.
All right. Hey, who likes being read to aloud? We all love being read to aloud. We allocate just 5 minutes for me to, so it's not that painful. So I'm going to read you a little bit from The Night the Lights Went Out, and then we'll squawk sports, and then we will do the Q&A. How's that sound?
Terrific.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
This is my event now, and this is
our host.
This is from a chapter called Miracle Ear in The Night the Lights Went Out. Everything was too loud. With only one operational ear, I had less surface area to absorb my kids yelling, ambulances whizzing by, and every other annoying sound the world around me makes on a daily basis. It's the same lesson you learn about weight dispersal in middle school. Imagine someone stepping on your foot with a flat shoe. It hurts, but their weight is spread out over the area of your foot. Now, imagine someone doing the same thing, only with a stiletto heel. All their weight is concentrated on a single sexy point, which means your foot will be much, much more aware of the ensuing pain. This happens with limited hearing as well. You might think that hearing loss would, in a mixed blessing, help blunt the impact of the noise around you, but it doesn't work that way. Instead, noise is hit with a more forceful impact. My brain, still hardwired to listen to the world in full, was now working double time to organize what little sound it was receiving, which left my hearing fatigued, vulnerable. It also became much harder to distinguish between all sounds, both loud and soft. This is known as the cocktail party effect, and it fucking sucks. For many people who are hearing impaired, the cocktail party effect discourages them from so much as leaving the house. The noise of the outside world is simply too much for them to bear. And I was coming to understand this fear intimately. My first night out after getting hurt was a cocktail party, naturally, for my wife's preschool. And when I walked into the room, I physically shrank from the ruckus. People came by and they said, "Hello, oh, I heard about what happened. That must have been so terrible, but isn't it nice you could come out?" But I couldn't make out any of the words. I sought out bare corners of the room as temporary shelter from the onslaught, self-medicating with mushroom puffs that I had stacked onto a tiny plate. Drinking might have helped alleviate the situation, but the last time I'd had a few, it hadn't gone all that well. I was off the sauce for good. I never did have all those Miller Lights I asked for in the hospital. Weeks later, we got invited to a bat mitzvah for Flora's friend. And the cocktail party effect there waged an even more vicious assault. There was an MC and a band, and the MC was loud, as MCs are paid to be. He took the mic to greet the crowd and damn near blew me out of my fucking chair. And I was quietly angry at that MC, that he was so loud. I was like, can you believe this asshole is screaming at everyone to dance at a party? I had to flee to the adjacent bar room. Sonia, my wife, came out to keep me company. "Come back in," I told her. "You shouldn't be stuck out here with me." "It's okay," she said. "I gotta find an earplug." I had dozens of earplugs at home, acquired over a lifetime of drugstore visits and business trip stays at hotels that gave them away for free. But I hadn't thought to bring an earplug with me this night, and one earplug was all I needed because I was half deaf. My right ear was strictly ornamental now. Could have cut it off and worn it around my neck like a warlord if I had felt like it. By the grace of God, I asked one of the servers, and hey, presto, he procured an earplug for me within minutes. This is the advantage of going to any bat mitzvah or wedding or anniversary party. There are always enough old people on hand at these things. The earplug demands are quite commonplace. So I stuffed the lone plug into my left ear and finally made it out onto the dance floor. The cocktail party effect didn't need mass gatherings to knock me sideways. We lived next to a highway. When Sonia opened the kitchen window, and oh, how she loves her fresh air, the noise from the traffic outside grated on me. We'd lived in this house for a dozen years, and in New York before that. I'd long been used to the ambient white noise of traffic outside, no longer. I couldn't stand it. It colored my mood to get pummeled by the Beltway's ruckus and to have it bleed into the regular noises inside our home and render everything a single indecipherable blur. Whenever two people at the dinner table talked at once, I fumed. And my kids, being kids, they talked over each other all the fucking time. Whenever Carter, our dog, barked suddenly, I jumped out of my chair and I yelled, "Jesus Christ!" reflexively. I started taking sound breaks, getting up from the table and going upstairs to rest from the noise and to tamp down my frustration. And one night I ate my entire dinner in another room because my bad mood had become an environmental contaminant. And restaurants were their own gauntlet. In the 2010s, the average new restaurant design featured unfinished ceilings, harsh angles, stainless steel everywhere, and a running playlist announcing to everyone that the head chef liked both hip hop and the Ramones. They wanted shitty acoustics. They wanted your ears to die while you ate. And the trend grew so widespread and obnoxious that servers themselves began to experience permanent hearing loss. And I'm going to end there. That's not a very high note to end on, but that's 5 minutes of reading. So you are now released from your time of me reading.
I think it's a good note to end on, though, because I think generally people, anyone who's tuned in, knows the basis of the story about the night you collapsed and the coma and the what makes up the first third of the book, which you'd written about at Deadspin in a very different way. But I'm not sure that people know that the night the lights went out. There it is.
Ooh, you got
green lights. how deep it goes into the recovery that you had to have in terms of your senses.
Correct.
I don't know if you had written about that before. I didn't. I was unaware of that, and I want to ask you, start by asking you about the writing process in terms of that. Did you have writer's brain, especially in your personal essay brain?
Yes.
When did you start thinking of these experiences you were going through, which from a strictly storytelling standpoint are, incredible, and not many people have done that. I didn't know that everything we learned about our tongue is wrong.
It's true.
When did you start thinking of these things as like, these are things I want to tell the world about? Because it's my story, but also you get into the science. It's deeper than just kind of you riffing on, something that happened to you in the way you might have on other topics. So when did you start thinking of this during the process as this is going to be a story I'm going to tell?
Well, I mean, I had already written about getting out of the hospital, like what had happened, the accident, from what I remembered, which is nothing. And then my time in the hospital afterward, again, my brain was not right, even though I had woken up from my coma, and I had written about that. And I sort of thought that was the end of it, with the exception of, I found out I was half deaf. I was like, oh, okay, well, I can write a blog post about that. And then I realized I couldn't smell, and I was like, well, I guess I'll write a blog post about that. That makes sense. And then I had emotional issues, and I was like, well, you know what? This is not just a few blog posts to toss off. This is actually more of a story about, the full arc of my injury and the toll it took on me after the fact, long after the fact, and the toll it took on my family, and what the process was of coming back to myself. Because if you're used to movies and TV, I told Roth this before, but you see someone get out of the coma and then they like stand up and then they're like, okay, like I was watching Outer Banks, and like Sarah Cameron flatlines for like a minute, and then she gets up and then they're in like a police chase. And that's just not what happens, right? So so it was clear that there was much more of a story to it. And then once I interviewed everybody, and once I got my own sort of history down, because I remembered better, as the year progressed, and I got more situational awareness. I realized that, I'm a journalist, so I had to do my due diligence when talking about the cochlear implant I received, and talking about hearing aids that I wear, and talking about smell itself, because I didn't know about smell, and nobody in America really knows about smell. There's one research hospital in America dedicated to smell. One. It's in Philadelphia. And that's it. And they referred me to a place in London when I asked them. So like, these are not, these are parts of both the human experience and the human anatomy that are worth exploring. And I've read enough pop history and enough pop science to know that it's better when you have more details, more interesting details, at least, not boring, dry ass shit. The real sort of, gunky kind of gory shit that gets more into the details of, okay, where did they dig into my ear exactly when they put an implant in, and how the hell does that thing work? Like, explaining it in a way that's entertaining and not, but also accurate. Hopefully, unless a doctor reads it and is like, no, doctor, you fucked everything up.
So when we spoke about this on the podcast, which we did, that was mostly about sort of the process itself. I mean, it was about you. But if we're going to talk about the book, and I think we should talk about the book, because the other thing that I want to emphasize is that the book whips ass. It's incredibly good.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, hey, no problem. I don't know if I hadn't mentioned that yet, but it's extremely good.
Honestly, between us, I know if you had finished it.
I did finish it. I
don't.
Yeah, this is
which is not always the case. So
no, I've asked Patrick never to ask me on these whether I finished it.
And honestly, like the big win is like, if someone was like, I read it, and they're like, I read it in 2 days or whatever, then I've done my job. Like, that's it.
No, it's a super fast read. I just was like trying to do the thing. I used to be able to do this in my 20s, read 2 books at the same time, like a home book and an away book.
Yeah, I can't.
It doesn't work anymore. Like it's all I can do to get through like a longish tweet. Like if it has an image attached, oftentimes I just won't finish it. But in this case, I do want to talk about the writing process. You mentioned at the beginning, in your answer earlier, the first maybe third of the book, maybe it's the light third or a quarter of it, is more or less an oral history of the night that you almost died and the 2 weeks that you were insensate and comatose.
Correct.
And it's not to say that there's a best or worst part of the book. I think all of it is really good. I found that gripping, not just because the people that you're interviewing are people that, you know, that we work with.
Right.
But, you know, it's nice part of it too. There's still like a little, like the Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the screen thing from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood every time Barry Chesky shows
That's
up.
right.
Or whatever.
I know him.
Yeah, but there is, I think, something really thrilling in reading that, in how close to the surface your process of trying to figure this out is. That like it really is, and it remains a mystery throughout the book. No one knows still why this happened.
Right.
Or, you know, certainly like what was going on in your head, you know, when you were in the dark for 2 weeks and everybody was just kind of fretting about it.
Right.
What did you get from the process of re-reporting that? Like, because I think a lot of the book is about you becoming more yourself in the recovery, but this is the part of it that you were in a lot of ways just absent for.
Yeah, it was. So in that sense, it was like vital information, right? Like it was important to know what my friends and family had gone through for the appreciation and the gratitude of it, right? Because they had to go through a lot of bullshit. Well, especially after I had woken up. Like me being asleep was the easy part. Once I woke up, it was even worse. And you know, but to know what they went through and to see myself you know, through their fresh eyes, it's something valuable I'll carry with me throughout the rest of my life in terms of what I do next. You know, like it's always important to remember what other people you care about and people whose opinions you respect, you know, their sort of clinical observations about you. Because when I interviewed my friends and family, I said to them specifically, I said, pretend you're not talking to me. Now that's kind of ludicrous, right? Like it's you're patently, you know, talking to me, like my mom was talking to her son. But I said, Mom, just try to pretend I'm a journalist and, you know, and you're talking, you know, sort of as dry as you can about, you know,
Just grilled her like Mike Wallace, like, no.
Yeah, that's right.
No, Mom.
Did
no.
try Mr. Magary.
And to hear all that, to hear what they had gone through, I felt closer to them, and I felt closer to myself in certain ways. I knew myself better, which means I would be able to handle certain things better going forward. Not another brain hemorrhage. I don't want another one of those. But you know, adversity of the more mild kind.
And did you, one thing that's sort of surrounds the book, which you must be aware of, but maybe you weren't, is that there's this whole universe of, you know, jackass sports bloggers like myself, that this was like a big story. You know, it was like the Kennedy assassination, or possibly Chappaquiddick, more Chappaquiddick for our ilk.
I'm the drowned person. I'm not Ted Kennedy in that one.
Somehow managed to play both parts. Really extraordinary thing. But
there were just rumors of drinking and perhaps somebody's, you know. But did you know that that other people, or when did you find out that other people who just know you through your writing, because you write such personal stuff and you've been doing it for so long, that there was kind of a universe of people who were very curious as to what happened, and were also, I remember, sort of weirdly anticipating the Deadspin piece. Like finally get around to it. Finally, he's letting me know what happened.
Here's the next.
And I don't think I was alone in that. I'm pretty sure I was not.
Everybody on the staff was like that, dude. Like we all called it Brain Blog, and we would get like updates from Drew on Brain Blog and where Brain Blog was in the pipeline. And then when it was like, yeah.
And I had written that post in February after I got out of the hospital. We didn't post it until May. My wife was like, Drew, just chill out for a second. You know, see if it's really something you want to do and something you want to share with the world. And of course, I have a big mouth, so I ended up doing it. And also, it was important to have clarity, because everyone on the Deadspin staff at the time, and we all quit, we all work for Defector now. They were very protective of me, which I really do appreciate. And they didn't really say what had happened to the general public. And that was very, very kind of them. But then, of course, you got like Barstool Reddit saying like I fucking crashed a car while I was drunk, which is, you know, fucking bullshit. And so there was sort of like this need to be like, you know, hey, hear it from the horse's mouth so that you know what happened. And of course, what happened was that I gave an account that I had before had interviewed, my friends and family too. So in some ways, my own narrative was unreliable. But I remember people were incredibly kind after what happened and said, they sent very, very, very nice emails. And I still to this day get emails like that, particularly now that the book's out. And I don't, I told someone else this, but processing it, it's odd. Like processing joy is not unlike processing the opposite sometimes. It takes time. Like I'm almost like taken aback by how nice people have been. I don't quite know what to say and I don't quite know what to do. And I just sort of wait. And then this sort of deep, gratification and appreciation, comes to the fore in my mind and it stays there. And it's a lasting happiness, which is something I didn't think there would be a deeper happiness before I got hurt. Turns out there is, which is nice, very pleasant to discover.
It's interesting. That's kind of like an animating tension in the book, is that you start out wanting very quickly, like basically, of course you want to leave the hospital as soon as you can, because everybody that's been in a hospital wants to leave the hospital as soon as they can.
Fucking hospitals suck. No,
and so like this was, and that version of you, I think, was probably like disinhibited because you were on drugs and had suffered a brain trauma and stuff. But like
quite a bit, yeah.
The version of you that was like doing weird tweets about what happened to you that didn't make no damn sense, and like texting me telling me to bring you beer in the hospital, and like not just me, like anybody that you could text.
Everybody can text or tell. That's right.
Yeah.
It's worth pointing out though, you did bring him a bag of loose lunch meat.
It was not loose lunch meat. I want to clarify that. No, I really appreciated it. And honestly, like I was nervous about it because I brought him some prosciutto and some capicola.
So good.
It's a New Jersey tradition. Whenever somebody has had something happen to them, good or bad.
I was gonna thought maybe it'd be brisket or a ziti, but I mean, it's a lot quicker. It's a lot quicker to get capicola.
Yeah,
they brought me a lot of bagels too, and those were.
Yeah, I knew enough too that like there was enough stuff about things that Drew had a hard time eating while he was in a hospital bed, and I know for a fact because I have seen my father do it, that you can just lower prosciutto into your mouth if you're flat on your back. It's fine. It's not the best way to eat it, but you can.
There was a while where I did not, if I reclined up like 10 degrees in the fucking hospital bed, I would get nauseous. And I would get angry that someone had put me in that position to make me nauseous. And one time they took me for a walk, but the walk was putting me on a plank and tilting it upwards while I'm still strapped to it like I'm fucking Hannibal Lecter.
Jeez.
And I got very nauseous and very angry. I was shouting, like I was saying, put me back in my bed and stuff like that. And the weird thing is that, and I didn't articulate this, I'm sure I articulated this well in the past, but I did not perceive my behavior at the time to be irrational or even angry. It all seemed very natural and made perfect sense to me. And so it didn't even register in my mind as anger. Now, if you were looking at me at the time, you say that guy's freaking the fuck out. But I did not have any awareness of that, and wouldn't for a good long time. Like, we're talking months and years and stuff like that.
Well, this is the thing that I wanted to ask about with it, because I think that's wanting things to be normal right away, wanting to be able to leave the hospital, go back to just the life that you had, like see your wife, see your kids, walk your dog, like do blogs, whatever, all of that. That all makes a lot of sense. And I think, it's easy enough for people to understand. The thing that is interesting in the book, and I think one of the things that really like runs through it in an interesting way, and that you can see, because it does, it ends happily in the sense that you are alive, but also, not just that you're yourself, but that like at the end of the book, you are much less angry and much less sort of lost in that fog of confusion and frustration than you are for most of the, the middle of it. I guess like the thing that I want to ask whether putting the book together helped you process it, but I think really like more, I guess I want to ask about the anger and the feelings of that. I mean, like, was it hard for you to sort of see yourself as how you were in the process of not just reporting it, but then trying to get all these thoughts together and write it out?
Yeah, it was hard to see myself that way. And I didn't want to see myself that way because it hurt my self-image, was like, hey, I'm a good guy. Like, no, why are you guys even pointing this out? You guys are just being, picky, and you're looking for bad things to point out. Fuck off. So I didn't see a lot of that. And the book helped in that regard. I remember my wife saying to me, well, in the hospital, you were a jackass. I was like, and there were times in the hospital where I really did not remember. I remembered certain things. I remember comporting myself in a different, completely fashion than I actually had. Like Christmas, I thought I was grateful and happy to see everybody and as convivial as I could be. And my wife was like, no, you were sullen and withdrawn and you didn't like us being there. And I have no memory of that. I really don't. And, that was probably more physiological at that point. But then it grew psychological after that. So then I didn't see that transition, and I didn't really perceive it at the time. So because also I wasn't as batshit as I was in the hospital once I had all the coma drugs and worn off. But I was still not functional in a good mental stable way. So that took time, and that took therapy,
But it's also really hard. This is obviously not in the same universe, but I had a severely herniated disc a couple of years ago that ultimately it took like 6 weeks or 8 weeks to finally I ended up having an epidural in my neck. And those days that would go on, it was really hard to think of anything outside of the pain when it was super acute.
It makes you angry.
And I'm less angry than more like apathetic. I would just like zone out, but I still wasn't being a particularly attentive, dad or husband. I mean, I don't rage, but you could see it in the book. And sometimes it feels like, did any of it feel like in the aftermath that you being told how you were acting, having some recognition of it, maybe not getting it all? Did you feel, was it guilt? Did you feel like you needed to explain yourself? Because there's some parts of this book where you're pretty harsh on yourself. And all I was thinking was like, man, your ears don't work, or you can't eat a fucking ice cream sandwich.
Yeah.
But then your kid is like, I liked you better, before, and kids say what they're going to say. So I'm just wondering, were all these emotions just constantly going through your head various times? Guilt, anger, trying to be better, etc.
Yeah, the story of, the story arc of the book is really about me trying to get back to where I was, and then having all these setbacks because I figured I was deaf. I realized I was deaf. I realized I couldn't smell, things like that. And, every time something came up like that, I always felt like I had an excuse to wallow, and that nobody could really understand what I was going through except for me.
Which is also true, though. That part is also true.
It is true, but also the fact that it's true is almost irrelevant, because it kept me up my own ass, right? Because I was like, well, none of you can possibly understand what I'm going through, so nothing you have to say about me right now is valid. Like, that's where I was coming from. And it was always like, it was always like, hey, this happened to me. I was the guy. I remember saying to my wife once, like, I'm the one who got hurt. Like, I'm the one who had the accident. And I remember that just being a very defensive stance I took. I was very defensive because I felt like I had earned the right to be defensive because I had collapsed for no goddamn reason.
There's a lot of stuff in the book beyond the recriminatory stuff. I will say that it's not just you beating up on yourself unnecessarily.
No, there are dick jokes and shit like that.
Yeah, of course. But I mean, it's also like all of that stuff is for a purpose. Like, it's not like a memoir of the kind. Like, there's a certain type of memoir where people were like, when I was drinking, I was the shittiest guy in the world, sloppy steaks, the whole, like just whatever, doing the whole thing. Like, I had a chapter about alcohol, about going off the sauce, and I took it out because it was like, how many fucking writers have written about alcohol? Like, what could I possibly say new about my relationship with alcohol that fucking like Mary Carr hadn't already? I guess it's fair enough. I mean, whatever. I resent that you felt obliged to take any of this out of the book, because I think it's such a complete accounting of a person that like it like really in that way, like it's different again because you're my friend, but it is like a pretty unsparing inventory of yourself and your neuroses. But then the part that I want to ask about now is that there's also some really, again, like writing that, you've written a lot about food, the stuff about smell and taste that's in here, beyond the sort of the science element of it, which is indeed fascinating, as Patrick pointed out. It's just like stuff that I did not really think or know about. That the food stuff, the experience of like tasting, I think it's peach jam for the first time is the thing.
Yeah.
That like, that is like extremely vividly expressed. And like peach jam is like, it's the top 5 jam for me. Like it's fine. But it was just like the thrill of being able to get something back that you didn't have is like really fully felt, and really like writing something like that, which is like the brighter part of it. Like,
And
had you had an experience
childlike
like
in the
that?
great, childlike in that wonderful way. Like, who the hell would think of peach jam? Like, spread it on. I'm sure it's fine, but this is the greatest.
Yeah,
thing.
it probably wouldn't blow your mind unless it was the first fucking thing you tasted in a year.
Oh yeah, it was something where I didn't know if I would. It was after implant surgery, and I didn't know if I would taste anything for months, for literal months. And it was, and luckily it was only weeks until I tasted the jam, and then when I tasted, I was like, "This is the best goddamn thing I've ever eaten. It's so good." And yeah, you can't have no recovery is on a straight trajectory, right? So that's the same in the story of the book. Like, and it's always been something, it's been a problem I've had whenever I've had a medical problem, is that I want to get better. I don't want there to be any setbacks. And when I start feeling a little bit better, I assume that it's all the worst is behind me. And that's just never the case, right? But that's sort of how you earn your comeback, right? By going through all those peaks and valleys. And that's what the book is. Because, the getting out of the hospital was the easy part. It's all the shit afterwards, and sort of, picking up the pieces, psychologically, that you end up with sort of more of an earned comeback, and you feel like, okay, all right, now I've truly have experienced the full panoply of what brain damage has to offer, and I feel like more of a veteran now, and I feel smarter and wiser, and a little bit prouder of myself than before.
Well, there is too. You go from the getting out of the hospital and then learning certain motor functions, and even the ear part it's kind of a $6 million man. We can rebuild him. There's a lot of the technology, but then the very later part of the book, it's confronting the things in your head, some of the stuff that had been there before, some of the stuff that had come after. And you had something, you wrote this one sentence that is something, you hit on something I've kind of been thinking about for years, but this is the best I've ever saw expressed. You said, life was designed to be incomplete. And I wonder if you could explain a little bit what you meant by that, because I really think that is that was the one I marked up the most. I think it's a turning point kind of in the book. And it's just such a fairly profound insight.
Well, because I think you're sold an American life narrative, right? That is, you go to high school, you have an awkward time in high school, you go to college, you party in college, you become a professional, you eat shit as a young professional, and then you move up and become triumphant, and then you get married and have kids, and then you retire, and then you see all the sights and stuff, and you've completed life, right? Like that's like the full like arc, and you have a bucket list, and if you've saved enough for retirement, you can do all the shit on your bucket list and cross it all off, and you will have died, because you'll die happy because you've gotten everything done. But you can't do everything. You can't. Just know that's not possible. You can't go to every place. You can't meet every person. You can't do everything, and that's not bad. Like, it just means that there's infinite possibilities, and that you're always going to be able to do something new, no matter how old you are, no matter what state you're in. And that's really great. Like, it's fantastic to think that way, because the other thing is that if you don't get to do something and you have a fear of missing out, like you're angry that other people got it, I've sorted out that actually I'm now pleased other people got to do the thing that I didn't get to do. Someone's getting to enjoy it, so why shouldn't someone else? And I don't want, if I can't go to the Super Bowl, I don't want the stadium to be fucking empty. I just saw that happen. You know what I mean? So it's just this realization that I do not have to I don't have to treat life like some multi-step project that I'm working to, and somehow death is like the product launch at the end. Like that's just not how it ought to work, because it's a fucking mess, but it's good that way.
Death as product launch is really one of the most accursed, like that will be like some sort of Silicon Valley truism within our lifetime.
That is where Goop is headed.
Yeah,
I mean,
right. Like
it essentially
we're finally going
is.
public into the universe.
I mean, what is being online now except an exercise in self-branding? Like my kids, they don't give a rat's ass about like the box office or who the richest celebrity is. They care about who got the most YouTube clicks. Like they care about clout, and they want clout of their own. Like my daughter wants to know how many TikTok followers she has and all that shit. Don't follow her on TikTok, you're not allowed.
Yeah, that'd be
I
weird.
made her make the account private anyway.
Also, Drew anonymized everyone in his family except for his dog.
Except for the dog.
Which is like a little Easter egg for the real heads, like the people that know what his dog's name is, which is not that many people. I mean, it's like, but it's in his posts. But it's funny, like I know the names of the children and the wife that you're referring to, but then Carter the dog is Carter the dog. He plays himself.
And people were like, "Oh, you named it after Chris Carter." And I swear to God, I never thought I never made that connection until someone asked me, and we had known him for like a fucking
You got
year.
two totally viable Vikings that you could have named him after, and you were just like, no, I don't know. Like I'm
That's
a little
right.
Ryan guy, I guess.
And the kids wouldn't have let me name it after a Viking. They don't give a rat's ass.
So,
Teach him who Billy Carter was.
it's true. That would be like, I think everybody should know.
Well, the other thing is that we had a dog named Carter, and we had a fish named Jimmy. The kids just wanted to name the fish Jimmy. They just thought it was funny, and that's it. Like there was no connection between those two. And I tried to tell my dad that, and my dad was like, "Yeah, sure." And I'm like, "They're 5. They don't know who the fuck Jimmy Carter
Why would your
was."
dad like suspected that you were a soft touch for like whatever the 39th president of the United States or something?
They thought I was a big fan of the 1970s gas crisis.
Yeah, they're like, it's not funny, Drew. Stagflation was bad.
But if
I want to name it after a guy who was never going to die.
Yep,
that's right. That's
true.
right.
Our last immortal president. I want to ask briefly about the family stuff. And we talked about reporting this by talking to the various Kieran and Jorge and Megan and Barry and all the people that were there, and and Victor, that were just like sort of on the ground, more or less saving your life.
Yeah, first responders
that night. But most of the book, I mean, and I think the most affecting portions of the book have to do with your interactions with your family, your attempts to sort of like get that relationship working, not just back to where it was, but then better.
Yeah.
This is, I guess, a strange one to ask. Had you ever thought as intensely about the dynamics of your family, your role in it, like how that stuff worked? Like, was like thinking about this and like sort of addressing it as closely as you addressed it? Like, was that something that you'd really done before?
No, I was on autopilot, like, especially because the kids weren't babies anymore. It was like, all right, I don't change diapers anymore. We don't have to mix formula anymore. We don't have to like wipe their ass for them anymore. They're independent. And my wife and I, we knew each other all too well. Like her birthday was today, and I did not get her a present. She didn't get me a present for mine either. I made her mussels. And
did you do the recipe?
I did, but it needs garlic and onion. It definitely needs garlic and onion.
Okay.
But it was
I sent him one from.
It was still real goddamn good. But no, I felt like sort of I had that all settled. Like that was all squared away, and that was solid. And like we had good relationships. But I know now to be a bit more, to listen better to them, and to just sort of think about how I'm going to handle situations in a way that doesn't give them stress, but in fact eases their, makes their lives easier. It's not really, and you'll accuse me of Silicon Valleyism again. It's not really unlike dealing with people you work with or something like that, where it's like, if I'm going to Barry pissing and moaning about a post I did or something like that, well, I'm making his life harder than I need to. When really, our jobs, the reason we work together. As many hands make light work. I write the post, he edits the post, and we take each other's, we trust that each other will do a good job on those tasks, and then it goes out, but just always coming to people with problems, just because you'd rather have them solve it than yourself. I don't know if I'm putting that right, but it's just like, I went to my wife a lot, just basically to bitch, and look, always demanding sympathy. Like, oh, yeah, like if she didn't respond with just, oh, poor baby, like I was mad. and that's not really how a relationship can work. And so now, after all this and after what I've been through, I'm a bit more measured in how I react to everything, both short-term and long-term in my relationships with people. I don't know that I always get it right, but at least there's a bit more of an awareness of, okay, if I'm the other person and Drew's coming to me and like saying like, I don't know what to do about this dog. Well, what have I done? He's just basically unloaded all of his bullshit on me. So I think I'm better about it, but it's always a work in progress.
How did you ever worry? I mean, this isn't really your bag in general, but the last chapter takes place at Christmas a year later.
It is. It's a Christmas book. It's a sneaky underrated.
Yeah, it's like,
it has, and I was going to say,
are calling it the Die Hard of brain trauma memoir.
No, but it has a little bit of like if George Bailey didn't get to see his life, but he just laid around in the dark for the night while they threw the party.
Yeah, that's
actually right.
True.
It's like half It's a Wonderful Life. Like you got the part where I want to live after just laying in the dark. Was there any point where you actually thought this book could, and it's not, but did you ever have to check yourself about being sort of overly kind of message driven, like, or maudlin, or any of the things that you kind of get almost from badly written self-help books or sort of saccharine? Did any of those ever cross your mind, or when you were editing it, did it ever be like, this is too much? Because a lot of people go through trauma and they kind of never get past it, and that's also okay if you're not, completely destroying your life. But
yeah, and not everyone has the resources or the support system and things like that. So I think about those people all the time. But anyway, the answer to your question is, yeah, I worried about that. Like I'm someone who read Tuesdays with Maury and enjoyed it, actually. But the last thing I wanted was to write something that was fucking syrupy and shitty. And like there were a couple of passages where I was very earnest. And I went back and reread them to make sure I was like, is this Tuesdays with Drewy? And I was like, no, that's all right. Like I was like, it's on the border, but it's not quite there.
It's your life. It's your call to make.
There's usually a fuck in the middle of the sentence to make sure.
Well, it's more about the the sort of like lessons learned kind of approach to things that often
I don't like
life out of things.
I've been lectured enough by other pop culture entities that I know I don't like that. Like I really don't like it in fiction. When I'm writing it, if I'm writing about a lesson I learned from getting brain damage, and I'm clear and straightforward about it without turning it into, fucking Joel Osteen's, 12-step process to a better you, then I think it's okay. It's all right for me to talk about what I've learned and hope that, it's applicable to other people's lives. But you don't want to get into the, you don't want to get into the Sorkin shit where it's just, I'm talking to myself and haven't I learned so much, and aren't you enlightened by hearing me talk with myself for fucking 2 hours? And don't you realize, things were so much better when Walter Cronkite was the only newscaster in the world.
Well, you have that moment in the book that, as a writer, you say something along the lines of, because of what I've been through, and especially as a writer who has spent a career writing about your own foibles and bodily functions and, problems and worries. You have that line, something about, I thought my words were even more precious now. And I was really struck by that, because that seems to me, not knowing you personally, just knowing you through your writing, but that seems to me that had to be kind of a big sort of revelation, that even, what is it you say, you weren't something to your soul. You were bearing your soul, but you weren't sort of exploring your soul or whatever it says, that you were willing to tell anybody anything.
I think I was sharing my soul instead of just bearing it. Like I was just, before that it was just diarrhea of my mind, just telling you everything, just because I thought it was interesting to tell you all that, and not really thinking of it as a burden on other people, And so that was one thing that I had to sort of come correct on. But the other thing was that, like in terms of writing, like I think I've always sort of prided myself on being good at taking editing and stuff like that. Like, but although Tom Lay might complain and say otherwise. But like when I was with GQ and with book editors and stuff like that, I usually did what they said, because sometimes I just needed an editor to give me permission to do something that I couldn't bring to do myself, right? But the all that time though, I still thought everything that I thought was very important. That if I nurtured a thought and ruminated on it, it must have had some value in some way to the greater world. And that was not true, particularly, when dealing with my family. The idea that I always had to get my point across in an argument or after an argument, after I had stewed on it for an hour, that I had to let everyone know what I was thinking, because that was somehow that was what I considered to be open communication, that was somehow healthy, and that's actually not true. It's not true.
We have 2 Q&A questions, and we'll get to a minute if anybody has another one.
One in the
throw it
chat
up there
too. But yeah, do you want to do the video?
Yeah. So I want to tell this.
Video. Oh, God.
Hold on, I want to tell you a real quick story. This is something that stuck with me. It's probably 7-8 years ago. I was at a barbecue and with some old colleagues and friends, and I was arguing with a friend. I know we were arguing about the Brett Favre dong pictures. I can't remember what the argument was. I think he felt it was not why that was public information was unfair. I don't remember what the argument was. I know we were arguing about Brett Favre's dick though. And this other guy who was the boyfriend of our friend, who I knew a little bit, I'd met him a couple times. He's a Filipino immigrant, and he said something along the lines of like, I don't follow sports. I'd never heard of Deadspin as of the other day. But somebody, I believe his brother, had sent him an article, and he's like, but somebody sent me this, and it's the closest thing I've ever read to what it was like for me in college. And it was something you had written about being lonely at college.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And I remember hearing that and thinking, wow, Deadspin has a much bigger reach than the one I've had a couple things, in the Will Leach days. And it had broadened its scope, but also the Big Daddy Balls guy is changed, because this guy right here is telling me a very sincere story about the being lonely in college. And I bring that up only because if you follow your writing, everybody loves the jamboree and, well, I don't really read science fiction, but if you follow the personal stuff, this book is like it's almost a culmination of all that stuff that came before it too. Your dad book, all the personal writing. It's really not that anybody would thinks it's a good thing you went through this, but the insights that come at the end of this book are almost a complete circle to when you started writing like that and just got away from, door swings open jokes. And I personally was very moved by the last third of the book, particularly, mainly because I've had some shitty things happen this year. Also, I'm 50 now, and just being old, you
look very young for 50.
He's got a lot.
Thank you very much.
I don't even have a reason to kiss your ass. It's true.
Yeah, it's the clean living. But I tell you that story because that always stuck with me, that this dude who knew nothing about sports or Deadspin had gotten something out of that. And that book, it brought me back there because it does have this full arc. And in that, I wanted to reward you for not dying and for being healthy. Can you please roll the clip for us? This is for you.
Oh, it's going to be the thumbs. It's going to be the thumbs.
It's not the
It's
thumbs.
gonna be the
That's
thumbs.
too easy.
I think I know what it is now. Yeah.
Ah!
You have to narrate. We have no sound.
But I don't hear Joe Buck.
I know we can't hear Joe Buck.
It's going to be a disgusting act.
Here it comes.
Disgusting act.
This is really. Is that Corin Robinson congratulating him there?
Yeah, they had Corn Robinson for a cup
Nice
of
to
coffee.
sneak a guy in there. That's cool. Terrible.
That was a playoff game, and they won that game, and then I think they got absolutely fucking smoked the next week. Or that might have been the year that they went and got destroyed by the Giants, the 41-0 game.
I believe it was. Yeah, I didn't see a minute of that one. I was out. I was so sure the Giants were going to lose that I went into like a museum, and then I came back, and my roommate and his friends, who were all Vikings fans, were just drunk and sad.
I saw one half of it and one half of it.
A sincere, disgusting act is that's the Drew Magary that's Drew
What is it
Magary
about?
experience.
That's
I
how
have the
internet
YouTube
most
of Joe
beloved
Buck's
big boy.
Minneapolis Miracle Call bookmarked in Chrome, and so whenever I want a little pick me up, I still watch it to this day.
I started a flame war between him and Kurt Schilling at Vice Sports once. That was one of the highlights of my career.
Between Roth and Kurt Schilling?
Joe Buck and Kurt Schilling.
Really? Oh
Kurt
well.
and Kurt and I remain friends.
I tell you that, like, I get a lot of people being like whispering on the down low. They're like, I like Joe Buck, and I'm like, I like Joe Buck too. Like, I think most people like
Everybody
Joe Buck.
likes Joe Buck now.
He's
I think
pretty
if you hang
good.
Around all those guys that were like a decade ago were just punching bags, like him, Guy Fieri, like almost Tom Brady at this point. I feel like people just like, if you hang around and you're not obviously toxic while the whole rest of the culture gets way worse. Like Guy Fieri's like basically a viable Senate candidate in any state in the country right now.
I loved Guy Fieri. He's a good man.
So we have one sincere that's not exactly a question, and one that is.
I'm just going to go ahead.
I saw them both. You can read them both. It's fine.
Yeah. Just tell Eric the answer is Angie Everhart for me. Thanks for asking.
Here we have another one. I'll just psyched about this book, but I have a soft spot for your fiction. The Hike and the Postmortal are both outstanding. Any more sci-fi on the horizon for you?
I don't have anything planned just yet, but I do want to write another book, but I don't have anything right now. I am resting, Tristan, as you might have heard. I had brain surgery.
This is your chance to plug Point B, dude. That's basically science fiction, isn't it?
And yeah, because Point B is out, and also we're trying to make a television show out of it, and that's been my focus at the moment for next projects. But I'm not going to know how that's going to go until someone buys it, so I have to wait. But I do want to write something else. The next thing I write, I think, for a book probably will not be science fiction. I think it'll be something different, and it'll be mean. I want to write something mean.
Do we ask this?
Are
we asking the middle question?
Chat? There's one that.
I don't know what it'll be.
That Zane Harker asked, Merry Christmas to Zane. Is there any chance you can recover any sense of smell once you get a hold of some UK specialists that you mentioned earlier? Is that
I talked to UK specialists at a company called Absent, with scent spelled SCENT.
The world specialists have a fucking pun in their name. Is that real?
Yeah. They couldn't have been more helpful, but they said that I suffered from a certain brand of smell loss caused by traumatic brain injury that could come back because the nerve that controls smell, if it gets damaged, it has the ability to heal. But the part of my brain that it's carrying that information to, that may not recover. And so it is possible still that my smell could come back. And I met someone whose smell came back 10 years after they had that accident. So it's not out of the realm of possibility, but I spent a lot of time really feverishly trying to get it back. And I think in some ways that cost me precious time living as a scentless person and just accepting that. And, you know, it's a smaller part of a bigger picture, but it was just one of those things that I wanted back from the old me that I couldn't get back. I spent a long time desperate to get it and very despondent when I couldn't.
What if your first smell back was like a bathroom at Everton, a pub near Everton?
Oh, I would be elated if the first thing I smelled,
the smell of beans and
it's fine. If the first thing I smelled was a vinegar shit, it would be fine. I would not have any complaint. By the way, you can ask the club question in the Q&A. I'll answer it.
All right, fine. This is from Eric Ryberg. the internet's beloved Eric time. If you had to have someone club you in the head to give you another brain injury, which 90s babe would it be, and what type of implement would they use?
90s babe. They never.
This is 90s babes. This guy.
You never
This
get
is the whole
babe
thing for him.
anymore. That's. She's a babe. Swing.
Yeah.
All
Are
right,
you going to
let's-
answer the question?
Let's go with Joan Severance for fun. And then what type
Nice.
of implement would they use? So it would have to be, should it be a 90s implement? Should it be like a Thigh Master or something
Like a
like
The
roller
that?
blade?
club. It has to be the club, isn't it?
There is, yeah, it could be the club. There is still the possibility that the reason I suffered my initial injury was because of an assault. But it's nearly impossible to envision because Jorge Corona, who saw me fall, well, he looked away for 10 seconds while I was standing, and then he looked back and I was on the ground. So if someone was able to assault me in that short of a time and that thoroughly, tip of the cap to them. But I don't know what they would have used to get that done. But if you're gonna beat me senseless again, let's use a garden weasel. Why not?
It was good to get Bob Silverman's cigarette break in there. Also, I was a fan that
Yeah.
It saved my life.
It's so important for representation, but yes,
Saved my
also it's
goddamn
important
life.
to the story.
He was one of the people, he and Chris Thompson both said prior to my fall that I was acting very, very, very weird. And that was interesting because the guy who operated on me believed that something had happened to cause me to fall. And that would assume that, my fall had caused my brain hemorrhage and not the other way around. But those guys both credibly insist there was something wrong with me even before I collapsed. And what that thing was, nobody knows. But
have you landed on an explanation that's okay by you, or do you actually care to have one?
I don't care. Although I should note that, if you want the journey of how I got to not caring, you should read the book. Ding!
Looks like this. Buy it from Greenlight. It's available at Greenlight.
But that was sort of the ultimate thing to let go. You said it's one of those parts of life being incomplete, right? If it were, if I were a parent and I were missing a child, that would be a different sort of mystery. That would be one I want solved. But nothing about me solving it now would undo what's been done. All I would want is the knowledge to be able to prevent it from happening again. And I think even without knowing, I think I have taken as many steps as I can, particularly not drinking anymore.
Can I ask you one last question before we wrap up?
Sure.
The book gives you the sense that I'm generally curious. Do you feel, whatever physical things you still have, do you generally feel at peace with everything that has happened? Maybe not at all times, of course, but on the whole, do you feel like you've really come through, and now that the book is out and you've gotten better, do you feel at peace with it?
I do, to the point where, if anything, I worry, it's very funny that, that I can say I'm over it, but now I'm not writing a book about what happened, right? But I do try to make sure that that I don't come back to it too often, and that can still be something that is not necessarily easy, because I used to bring it up in passing a lot, and my wife would be right there. My wife had to deal with a lot of bullshit, so that's not great. And then I have to be a bit more sensitive about it from going forward. But I feel pretty good. But I do want to say that I remember I went on NPR and gave an interview, and my publisher was like, "When you closed the circle, Drew, you were too happy at the end of the interview." So, no. I'm like, "Oh, you're great now. I don't have to read the book to know what happened." But
Giving away the ending of your own memoir. It's kind of hard to. I mean, just by doing the interview, you have spoiled the book.
Well, what's funny is that someone could get hurt. The other memoir I wrote had a happy ending. And so it was like, oh, well, Drew's good from here on out. And that didn't happen. So I'm like, the next memoir will be a heart attack, but I don't want that to happen at all.
Well, it's now you see if you can spin 20 years of general, regular physical and mental health into something. That's the real challenge.
That's right.
All right, we have real quick on 11/11. November 11th. I believe that's Veterans Day. It's at 6 p.m. We have to do it early this time, Dave. That's 6 p.m.
Right. Okay.
You have to honor the
it is
troops.
Therapy.
Hail Mary, the story of the National Women's Football League, which you probably never heard of. And we will have co-authors Lindsay D'Arcangelo and Brittany Della Creta. And this book is fascinating because I knew nothing about it. And once again, Drew's book is excellent, very heartfelt, and it actually gets pretty deep at the end. I think you'll be impressed, even
Thank
if
you
you
so much, Beck. Thank you.
just know him from the dick jokes and such, which are also in there.
And thank you, the green light. This was great. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, so please, it's in the chat. Buy it from Greenlight or at least from a local, and take us out if you would, Katie.
Well, again, thank you so much for that fantastic discussion. And thanks to everybody for joining us. Don't forget to buy your copy of The Night the Lights Went Out in store or online at greenlightbookstore.com. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. Have a great night.
Have a great night. Bye.
Bye.
Happy Halloween.